Welcome everybody, my name is Hector. If you are new around this channel, here we talk about everything related to personal finance, from stock market, real estate, cryptocurrencies, and even NFTs. So if you're into that kind of stuff, please consider subscribing so you can get this content out there to get to more people just like you. Hey, today we're going to talk about 7 things that rich people don't do but poor people do. All right, so number 1 in our list, it is buying things by impulse. It's interesting because even though technically rich people could afford most of the things they want, if not everything they want, that doesn't mean that they made their money acting that way. In most cases, rich people don't like wasting their money by buying things impulsively. And I understand that for some people, it might be really tempting to go to the store and buy those shoes or those jeans or that shirt that you've been looking at for weeks. And as soon as you get the money, you might feel very tempted to buy it, or that Tesla at the dealership just staring at you. It is tempting, but in reality, there's not a lot of rich people that have these buying patterns. Rich people don't buy stuff by impulse. At least that's not the norm. You might think, I've seen people on TV with money just buying stuff left and right. I've seen them driving their Lambos and, flying in private jets. But this is not the norm. I would venture to say that less than 10% of rich people would show those buying patterns. The vast majority of rich people are quite frugal. They don't really need to show off these kind of things to, let people know that they have the money. They know they have the money, and therefore they live just normal like any other person. But like Warren Buffett said, if you buy things that you don't need, you eventually have to sell things that you need. And so people with money, people that know how to make money, they understand this concept, and so they don't spend their money in meaningless things. All right, so moving on to point number 2, and we're talking about inheritance. This is a little bit controversial because some people are in favor of it, some people are opposed to it. Whatever the case it is for you, reality is not all of us are that lucky. Not all of us receive large amounts of money from our parents, but that is totally fine. In fact, rich people, especially those who are self-made millionaires, don't necessarily like the idea of leaving their kids with large amounts of money in their bank account. Just look at what Bill Gates said. So Bill Gates has gone on record saying that each of his kids will inherit $10 million, which I understand that sounds like a lot of money, and for most of us that would be a really nice head start. But in actuality, that's nothing compared to the amount of money that he probably has in his bank account, and that is because he prefers them to learn how to make their own money instead of him having to leave everything set up for them, which I understand $10 million is quite a bit, but you get the point. People with money, they prefer their kids or their children to learn how to make money. So the fact that you or me don't have a big amount of money inherited from our parents, that doesn't mean that we can't make our financial stability happen. Point number 3 is luxury brand or designer clothing. Back to what I was saying in point number 1. Rich people can technically afford any kind of clothing they want. I mean, it's not a big deal for them. But that doesn't necessarily mean that is how they want to spend their money. Hard-earned money in most cases. Take, for example, the founder of IKEA, Mr. Kamprad. His net worth right now is $58.7 billion, yet he buys his clothes secondhand just to save money. Bill Gates is another good example of this behavior. For instance, he could afford his entire house, packed up with Rolexes. I'm pretty sure of that. Yet he still wears his $10 watch. And I think it's because people like them understand that we are way more than just the clothes that we wear. All right, so point number 4 is expensive housing. Some people tend to think that just because rich people have bigger budgets, they like spending their money in housing, which is just not true. Don't go by what you see on the TV or shows or the internet. Don't be misled by that. In reality, most rich people, like most of us, will try to find good value when buying housing. Whether it is a investment property or housing, they will, try to get good value, good bang for their buck. They will probably be able to afford a little more of those conveniences that we all look for, like a pretty house, like safety, like accessibility. But that doesn't mean that they will throw all their money at it because they understand the concept of assets and liabilities. Again, a great example of this behavior is Warren Buffett, who, even though he's able to buy whatever type of house he wants, he still lives in his first house, the first house that he bought for $31,000 back in 1958. All right, our next point is owning versus renting. It's almost become a trend to rent housing instead of owning it. And I understand, mostly because it's more flexible. I understand it's a lot easier to move from one city to the other one if you get a better job offer if you're renting instead of being stuck with a mortgage. But there's very few rich people that don't own their properties or their housing. Going back to point number 4, they understand the concept of assets versus liabilities. And so in most cases, they will buy a house that they can afford, but they will own it instead of just renting it. All right, the next point is kind of a weird point, but I want to elaborate on it. And this is credit usage. All right, so if you have been around the internet learning about personal finance in the last couple of years, there's a lot more education now with respect of credit usage. And now, for the most part, I would say most people understand that credit utilization, it's an important aspect of your credit score. If you live in the US, you have a credit score, and credit utilization builds up to 15% of that. So credit card usage is generally good if you know how to use it. But this is a big piece of information that I want to share with you, because most rich people, although they will use credit instead of cash or debit, most rich people don't have more than one credit card. So that means that even though having multiple lines of credit can, in the short and midterm, benefit you in your credit score, in most cases, having different or multiple credit cards could actually bring a little bit of inconvenience in terms of monitoring all your credit lines, because it becomes more difficult. So most rich people will use credit, but will only use 1 or 2 credit cards. So they have all their credit usage under control. I think that's the bottom line of this point. And our last point is late fees. As most of us, rich people don't like wasting their money paying for late fees. And this point actually goes hand in hand with our last one, which is credit utilization. We said that rich people tend to keep good track of their lines of credit, and because of that, they are incredibly punctual at paying their balances, helping them to avoid paying for those late fees. Unfortunately, the vast majority of the money made by banks in interest is made out of the middle class and low class, which is, the sectors that tend to end up paying for all those late fees because we don't know how to utilize our credit, but rich people do. Luckily, you don't have to be afraid of remaining in ignorance. Because of channels like this, you can now learn more financial concepts like the ones that we talked about and become more financial literate so that you can start making the right moves to move towards your financial freedom. So if you learned anything from the video, would you do me a favor and hit that like button for the YouTube algorithm? Also consider subscribing to my channel so you can get an alert every time I post new content. So these were, guys, the 7 things that rich people don't do that poor people do. And so I hope you enjoyed it, and I'll see you when I'll see you. Bye.